40 contacts, still holding. 31 minutes since the broadcast went live. The sensor display showed them arranged in a forward wedge, 140,000 kilometers from the Adamantine's bow, and not one of them had moved. 40 Sothran compact warships, sitting at the edge of Earth's solar system, doing nothing, which was the thing nobody had planned for. Owen Dale's voice came from the communications panel, careful and level. "Commander, we have 3 assembly transponders broadcasting on regulatory frequencies." Sen Ora did not look up from the display. "Which ones?" "The Uzeller Directorate." A pause. "The Dremath Assembly." Another pause, shorter. "The Pale Collective." All 3 are transmitting formal observer status notifications. One had been the optimistic projection. One, if everything went exactly right, and the political winds inside the assembly were exactly where their intelligence suggested. 3 was a different category of answer. 3 was something else entirely. Sen exhaled, slowly enough that nobody in the command module heard it. Owen's voice continued, quieter now, the register of someone still processing what his instruments were showing him. "The Uzeller Directorate is also transmitting a formal regulatory inquiry, addressed to the Commission, requesting full documentation of all Protocol 12 enforcement actions in the last 2 centuries, with specific attention to comparative application standards." On the sensor display, 40 contacts, unchanged, holding position. The archive sleeve was on the desk beside her station. Physical paper, analog ink, the one object in the command module with no digital backup, because Sen had printed it herself and carried it aboard by hand, and had never trusted a system she hadn't built to hold the things that mattered most. The mechanism was visible now, not just to Earth, to everyone watching. The ceiling at this moment was not a structure. It was a question on the public record, and questions on the public record had a way of requiring answers. Stay close, 40 ships came to end this. What happened next is the part they didn't put in the compliance manual. 6 weeks earlier, the transmission arrived at 04, 12 hours, and Meridian Hub went white. Not the outside, the inside. Every display in the building, every hollow surface, every monitor from the signal archive wing in the subbasement to the operations floor 7 levels up, loaded the same image simultaneously. The Sothran compact regulatory seal, 3 interlocked bands over a field of deep blue, surrounded by the sigil marks of the Assembly's senior member species. Sen was already at her desk when it happened. She had been there since 02:30, which was, or rather had been, a normal Tuesday for her. The subbasement was quiet at that hour. She preferred it that way. The smell of the place, industrial sealant from the original freight terminal construction that no renovation budget in 12 years had managed to fully remove, was so familiar she had stopped noticing it. She noticed it now. Her brain was doing the thing it did under sudden stress, cataloging the ordinary details of the room as an anchor against whatever was coming. She did not wait to hear the transmission. She was already pulling the raw signal file. This was the wrong detail, the thing that would not make sense to anyone reviewing the security logs later. Every other analyst in Meridian Hub spent the first 4 minutes watching the translated broadcast on their screens. Sen pulled the original compact signal stream and ran it through the resonance subtext analysis system she had spent 6 years building on her own time, in her own notation format, in a physical log that sat beside her keyboard, because she did not trust the institutional network with the methodology. The translation software the Directorate used stripped resonance data. It had always stripped resonance data, because mapping Sothran mandibular subtext to human emotional equivalents was considered, by the people who designed the system, too imprecise to be useful. Sen had spent 6 years demonstrating that imprecision was not the same as worthlessness. The translated transmission in English was calm, measured, the voice of an institution that had been making announcements of this kind for 2 centuries and had no reason to expect this one to be different. Protocol 12, Expansion Statute, Subsection Regulations, Earth's 3 outer settlements in violation of provisional membership boundary coordinates. Surrender of colony vessels, dismantlement of installations. Compliance fleet inspection within 30 days. The original signal stream, beneath the translation, was something else. The resonance signature for urgency under concealment ran through the entire address like a second current beneath the first. Sen had documented that signature twice in 6 years of archive work. Once in a compact emergency session following a trade corridor collapse. Once in a private communication between 2 compact ministers that had been leaked by accident 14 years ago. The feeling of needing to act quickly before someone else does. They were not announcing from patience. They were rushing. Something about Earth's outer settlements had moved across a threshold they had been watching, and they had dressed the response in the language of regulatory procedure, because they did not want anyone to see the urgency underneath. Sen wrote that up in 40 minutes. She marked it Priority Alpha. She sent it to every senior analyst address she had access to. She received 0 responses. By 6 in the morning, Meridian Hub was full of diplomats. Director Havern Crisp had a briefing room on the 3rd floor, and Sen was not in it. She sat in the back of the larger assembly space 1 level down and watched the main screen while 4 diplomatic advisory teams laid out Earth's options in careful professional language. Surrender the outer settlements in a phased process. Surrender them immediately. Offer partial dismantlement as a good faith gesture while negotiating the rest. Each option came with a timeline and a projected response from the compact and a list of what Earth would receive in exchange. Crisp was 64, former treaty architect. The kind of patience that came from spending 30 years building agreements word by word, comma by comma, in rooms where losing one's temper was a professional liability. He sat with his hands flat on the table and listened to every option without interrupting. When the last team finished, he asked one question: what happens if we simply don't comply? The room shifted, not loudly. A physical thing, the subtle realignment of attention that happens when a room encounters a question it has been avoiding. The lead diplomatic advisor, a careful woman named Sella Marsh, explained the consequences with precise professional language. Assembly trade sanctions, communication relay suspension, transit corridor restrictions, political isolation from 47 member species. She spoke for 6 minutes. Sen watched Crisp's face while Marsh spoke. He was not afraid. He was calculating. There is a difference, and it is visible in the eyes if you know what to look for. He was running numbers that had nothing to do with the consequences Marsh was describing. Sen pulled out her tablet and sent him a direct message. One line: the compact is nervous. Resonance data confirms it. Read my report. He glanced at the tablet. Then he looked up and scanned the room until his eyes found her in the last row. He held the look for exactly 2 seconds. Then he returned his attention to Marsh and let her finish. After the briefing, he did not walk toward the diplomatic team. He walked toward Sen. Commander Aura, he said, low enough that the people packing up around them could not hear. Send that report again. Mark it for my eyes only. She had it in his inbox before he reached the door. That night, the archive went into the printer. Fen Callow appeared at her elbow at 02:15 and set a coffee beside the output tray without comment. He looked at the stack of paper accumulating in the tray. He looked at Sen. He did not ask. This was, she reflected later, exactly why she had requested him as her deputy analyst. Some people ask questions they already know the answers to. Fen asked nothing and refilled the coffee when it ran out. The archive was 200 years of assembly enforcement records. Protocol 12 cited 44 times against member species in that period. Every case documented. The date, the species, the nature of the violation, the response, the outcome, unrestricted access, available to any assembly member, apparently never read cover to cover by anyone in Earth's directorate. By the 3rd day, the ink annotations in Sen's physical notation log were denser than the printed text. In 44 assembly enforcement actions over 2 centuries, she wrote at the top of page 1, 42 species complied within the stated window. She underlined the next line twice. The remaining 2 reached what the archive designates as resolved by alternative regulatory engagement. No further explanation was provided in the official record. Both species still existed. Both were still present in assembly trade and communication records. Neither had expanded its territory by a single coordinate since the date of resolution. She read that last part 4 times. Then she boarded the transport to Callaway Shelf. The journey took 7 hours. Sen spent most of it with the archive open across her knees, reading by the transport's overhead lighting while the outer solar system moved past the small window to her left. The shelf's habitat dome was visible for the last 40 minutes of approach, a pale hemisphere against the darker surface, larger than it looked in the official population projections. Official figures listed Callaway Shelf at roughly 340,000 residents. The actual count, when you included rotating labor crews and long-term contractors, and the families who had simply decided that lower gravity and cleaner air recycling and fewer political complications suited them better than anything Earth's surface currently offered, was closer to 470,000. 3 full generations had been born there. Settlement Administrator Rava Holt met Sen at the East Operations Hub, shook her hand firmly, offered coffee, and before Sen had asked a single question, told her that the evacuation transport the Directorate had sent 3 days earlier was still sitting at Pad 4 with 0 passengers aboard. How many were scheduled? Sen asked. 800 on the first wave. Families with young children, people who wanted to go voluntarily. We expected it to be straightforward. Holt's expression was not quite neutral. They changed their minds, all of them. Pad 4 was a large berth. The transport had capacity for 800 and held, at present, a crew of 9 who were playing cards in the lower hold. Outside the observation window, the settlement's main residential corridor ran long and curved, light panels overhead, planters along the center walk. People moved through it at ordinary pace, going about their day. Not running, not panicking, simply not leaving. Sen asked to meet some of them, and Holt brought her to the community hall in residential block 7. 200 people when she arrived. 400 within 30 minutes, because word moved quickly that someone from the Directorate had come to talk. Sen had expected fear or anger or the particular mixture of both that tends to define moments of political crisis. What she found was neither. A retired tunnel engineer named Callum Dere, 22 years working the mining corridor on the shelf's eastern face, sat across from her with his hands folded and told her he had watched the compact's transmission 3 times. He had read every analysis available through the public feeds. He had come to a conclusion. The protocol has been on the books for 40 years, he said. They watched us build every dome, every foundation beam, every pressure seal, every section of this corridor I'm looking at right now. They had monitoring systems. They saw all of it. For 14 years, they said nothing. He shook his head once, not angry, certain. That's not a law being enforced. That's a door being shut. Sen did not argue with him. He was not wrong. Then she met Nola Brem, 74 years old, seated near the back wall of the hall in a chair she had clearly occupied before, with the quality of stillness that belongs to people who finished deciding something a long time ago and have not needed to revisit the decision since. Her daughter had been born on Callaway Shelf. Her granddaughter had been born here, in the second-generation medical facility 3 corridors over. She had come as part of the first civilian settlement wave 41 years ago, part of a broader effort to establish that space was not only for governments and selected personnel, but for ordinary people who wanted something different. Holt introduced them. Nola Brem looked at Sen for a moment with the unhurried attention of someone who reads people the same way Sen read signal data. Not for what they present, but for what runs underneath. Then she said, "My grandfather did not carry his family across a collapsing border on his back so that I could apologize for being on a moon." The community hall went very still. Not silent, still. The particular quality of 400 people arriving at the same moment at the same understanding. Sen did not write that sentence in her notation log. Some things do not require annotation. They require only to be kept. She spent 2 days on Callaway Shelf and interviewed 61 residents across multiple community groups. No coordinated resistance movement. No central organization. No signal sent from above. No political structure mobilizing its members. Each person had independently watched the same transmission, read the same information, sat with the same facts, and arrived at the same conclusion. They were not going to leave. What struck Sen most was not the decision. It was what the decision revealed about the model that had failed to predict it. Earth's diplomatic advisors had built their projections on the assumption that individuals, under sufficient institutional pressure, calculate personal survival above everything else. Push hard enough and the organism retreats. The compact appeared to operate on the same assumption. 42 species had read the same ultimatum and made the same calculation and complied. All of them correct. All of them rational. All of them stopped growing. Callaway Shelf had 470,000 people who had reached a different calculation entirely. They were not protecting a settlement. They were protecting the idea that they had the right to be there, that their children had the right to be there, that the distance between Earth and the nearest star was not a boundary someone else got to set the height of. And when that was the thing at stake, the survival calculation ran differently. Back at Meridian Hub, on day 8 of the 30-day window, Sen pulled the compact's own expansion history. She had been half expecting what she found. The full weight of it still stopped her. Protocol 12, the same statute the compact had cited against Earth, had applied in theory to every assembly member for 2 centuries, including the compact itself. Including each of the 14 times the compact had expanded its own permitted zone during that period. Unauthorized expansion, technically. Settlements established beyond boundary coordinates. The same action in the same category of violation. Not one of those 14 expansions had been cited as a violation. Not one had triggered a compliance notice, a regulatory inquiry, a fleet mobilization. The Compact's expansion zones had simply been recognized after the fact. The Commission had reviewed each case and approved what had already been built. The maps were updated. The record moved on. The statute was not applied to them, Sen wrote at the top of a new page. It was not overlooked. It was simply not pointed in their direction. She underlined that 3 times. On day 9, the encrypted relay came through. The sender identifier was masked. The routing signature, which Sen traced twice because she did not trust the first result, placed the origin inside compact administrative space. Either a trap or exactly what it appeared to be. A communication from someone on the other side who had taken an enormous risk. 7 words. Our archive is the most studied. Below it 1 character, an initial, no title, no position, no context. Sen read it 4 times. She sent a single acknowledgement pulse back through the relay and closed the channel. She did not sleep that night. She sat at her desk with the archive on the left side and the notation log on the right, and the coffee Fen had left growing cold beside the keyboard. And she thought about what kind of person, inside the Compact, spent enough time with humanity's history files that they found it necessary to warn us. The archive she had spent 8 days reading was unrestricted, available to any assembly member. Apparently never read cover to cover in a single document until now. 7 words was a message that could only mean one thing if you understood what the archive contained, which meant whoever sent it understood what the archive contained, which meant they had read it, which meant somewhere inside the oldest regulatory institution in the assembly, someone had done the reading and found something in it that made them reach across the divide to a species that 11 warships were preparing to face with 40. Some things do not require analysis. The speaking slot was approved on the 3rd request. The first 2 had been declined by the scheduling committee with the particular efficiency of bodies that manage agendas the way other people manage borders, by deciding what belongs inside and what doesn't. Sen's name had not been on the original list. It was not on the revised list. It appeared on the final list because Director Crisp had made 1 phone call, and whatever he said in that call, the committee had not called back to argue. He told her she had 20 minutes. He told her to say what she actually believed, because the assembly had spent 6 days hearing what people thought they should believe, and it had not produced anything useful. She arrived at the podium at 11:47 in the morning. 193 national delegations, 9 observer states, an estimated live audience of 3.9 billion people, which was a number Sen had read in the briefing materials and then carefully set aside, because thinking about 3.9 billion people while preparing to speak produced a specific quality of paralysis that was not useful to her. She did not thank anyone for the opportunity. She started with a number. 44, she said. That is how many times the Sothran Compact has cited Protocol 12 against a member species in 200 years of assembly enforcement history. 42 of those species complied within the stated window. She paused, let it settle. The remaining 2 reached what the official record calls resolved by alternative regulatory engagement. I spent considerable time trying to understand what that phrase means. The records do not explain it directly. What they show is that both species still exist, are still present in assembly trade and communication records, and have not expanded their territorial zones by a single coordinate since the date of resolution. Another pause, shorter. That is what compliance costs, not your settlements, your next step. The chamber did not make noise. It shifted. The physical realignment of collective attention that happens when a room decides, as a single body, that it is listening. Before the second data panel, Sen straightened the courier's sleeve on the lectern edge. A habit, or what looked like one. She did not need the physical archive at the podium. She had the figures memorized. She had brought it anyway because there was something she wanted the delegations to see. That the document existed, that it was paper, that someone had printed it and carried it here by hand, and that the act of doing so meant something about how seriously she took what was inside it. She activated the second display. 14 entries. 2 centuries of compact zone expansions, each one technically unauthorized at the time of establishment, each one subsequently reviewed by the Commission and approved after the fact. No compliance notice. No enforcement fleet. No alternative regulatory engagement. The maps had simply been updated to reflect what the Compact had already built. The statute, Sen said, was not applied to them. This is documented. The record is unrestricted. Every assembly member has had access to it for 200 years. She let that sit for a moment longer than was comfortable. We are not asking the Commission to break its own rules. We are asking it to apply them consistently. We are asking in public, on every frequency available to us, in a way that any species with a receiving station can observe and evaluate. Movement in the chamber, sharper than before and from multiple directions. Sen did not look at the delegations. She looked at the display. 3 assembly species have, in the past week, quietly requested observer access to Earth's diplomatic proceedings. Not publicly, not through official channels. Informally, through back routes that were chosen specifically to avoid drawing the compact's attention. They asked. She looked up. That tells you something about the political landscape inside the assembly right now. We are not as isolated as the regulatory notice was designed to make us believe. She had been speaking for 19 minutes. She stopped. The vote was called 3 hours later. It required a 2/3 majority, 129 votes to authorize the public noncompliance strategy. The final count came through at 144 in favor, and Sen was not in the chamber when it did. She was in a corridor 2 floors below, sitting on a bench with her notation log open across her knees, and when her tablet showed her the number, she sat with it for a long moment before she stood up. Havern Crisp found her there. He did not say anything. He put one hand briefly on her shoulder and then walked past her toward the stairs. That was sufficient. On day 26 of the 30-day window, the Adamantine took position at the Hevel Ring. The Hevel Ring was the name Earth's navigational teams had given to the gravitational corridor adjacent to Jupiter's outer boundary, the most efficient approach vector from outer assembly space into the inner solar system. If you were coming to Earth with a fleet and you understood orbital mechanics, you came through the Hevel Ring. Earth had known this since the first assembly membership briefing, 42 years ago. Sen had read the briefing documents. So they were there, 11 ships in total. The Adamantine at center, 10 flanking vessels arranged in a modified survey formation because no one had the authority to pretend they were a military fleet, and the survey formation was what the ships had been built for. The Adamantine itself was a deep space survey vessel, retrofitted with defense arrays over the past 4 years, chosen for its position because it was the largest hull Earth currently had in the outer system, not because it was designed for what Sen was about to ask it to do. The archive sleeve was on the desk at her station. She had brought it aboard by hand, carried it through the docking tube herself, set it down on the operations desk in the command module. The desk had 4 integrated display surfaces and a dedicated secure network terminal and a backup power relay. The courier sleeve sat beside all of that and contained none of those things. Paper, ink, 200 years of enforcement records in a format that could not be remotely wiped or network intercepted or rendered inaccessible by a system failure. One object in the command module with no digital backup. Sen looked at it for a moment after she set it down. Then she went to the command chair and did not look at it again, because looking at it would have been a tell, and the crew needed her to be the version of herself that did not show tells. At 06, 12 hours, the compact fleet dropped out of faster-than-light transit 140,000 kilometers beyond the Adamantine's bow. 40 contacts on the sensor display. Bright against the dark, arranged in a forward wedge, the same formation documented in 39 prior compliance operations. Sen recognized it from the archive photographs. She had read those too. Her communications officer looked up from his panel. Owen Dale, 28 years old, 2 years assigned to the Directorate's Deep Space Signals Division. Hands steady. Voice the kind of steady that meant he had decided to be steady rather than discovering it came naturally. They are broadcasting on assembly standard frequencies, he said. Fleet Arbiter is requesting an immediate channel. Open it, Sen said. The image that appeared on the main screen matched the intelligence profile exactly. Fleet Arbiter Drevhen Cowl, 2.1 meters, ochre-gray banding across the upper thorax, 3 sensory filaments visible above the jaw structure. 31 years in compact enforcement service. 22 uncontested compliance operations on his record. Sen watched the filaments rather than his face, because Cowell's facial structure did not produce the micro-expressions her brain was trained to read. But the filaments did something she had spent the last 3 days reviewing footage to understand. At rest, they moved in small ambient patterns. Under pressure, they retracted. Right now, they were doing neither. They were very still, in the specific configuration she had identified in the archive footage as active calculation. Cowell told her that Earth had failed to meet its compliance obligations. He told her that the fleet was present to enforce the Commission's regulatory requirements. He told her that Earth's defensive formation should stand aside immediately and allow the fleet to proceed to inter-system coordinates for inspection purposes. He spoke for 80 seconds. His filaments did not move once. "Fleet Arbiter," Sen said, "Earth acknowledges your presence and respectfully declines to stand aside." A pause. When Cowell spoke again, his voice carried the same regulatory precision. "Commander, you are 11 vessels. I am 40. Compliance is not a question of preference." "With respect," Sen said, "the question was never compliance. The question is what the galaxy observes happening after you make it mandatory. And I think your own internal communications tell you the answer to that better than anything I could say." Longer pause. "Owen," she said without looking away from the screen, "activate the broadcast array. Full spectrum, assembly standard encoding addressed to all receiving stations." She heard his hands move across the panel. "Active," he said. "We are live on 91 assembly frequencies." She looked back at Cowell. His filaments had retracted by approximately 30%, a configuration she had no archive reference for. "Fleet Arbiter," she said, "whatever you decide to do next, the rest of the assembly will be able to evaluate it in full context." The channel stayed open. The sensor display showed 40 contacts, unchanged. Sen reached into the courier's sleeve and set the top document on the desk in front of her, open to the first page of the enforcement archive. She did not read it. She had it memorized. But she set it there, face up, visible to the command module's recording systems, because the physical fact of it being present was its own kind of statement. Cowell looked at her for a long moment. Then his channel closed. The broadcast had been live for 12 minutes. Sen ate something at her station. She could not remember exactly what afterward. Owen brought coffee without being asked. The crew worked with the particular focused quiet of people who understood that the next thing that happened was not going to be determined by anything they did, and so the most useful thing they could do was remain calm and let the situation breathe. 18 minutes. 23. At 31 minutes, Owen's voice came again. Careful, and even, the register she had learned over 3 days to read as him reporting something his instruments were showing him that he had not yet finished processing. "Commander, we have 3 assembly transponders broadcasting on regulatory frequencies." The sensor display still showed 40 contacts. "Forward wedge, unchanged. The Uzeller Directorate, the Dremath Assembly." A brief stop. "The Pale Collective, all 3 are transmitting formal observer status notifications." 1 had been the optimistic projection. 3 was a different category entirely. "The Uzeller Directorate is also transmitting a formal regulatory inquiry, addressed to the Commission, requesting full documentation of all Protocol 12 enforcement actions in the past 2 centuries, with specific attention to comparative application standards." Sen exhaled, slowly. The command module did not hear it. On the sensor display, 40 contacts. Still holding, still at 140,000 kilometers, still not moving. But the Uzeller inquiry was now on the public record, transmitted on assembly standard frequencies while an active enforcement operation was in progress, and that changed the political geometry of everything that happened next. Cowell could proceed. Nothing had physically stopped him. But every action his fleet took from this moment forward would be evaluated against a formal inquiry, asking exactly why Protocol 12 had been applied to Earth in a manner that appeared inconsistent with its application to the Compact's own 14 expansions. The mechanism was visible, not just to Earth, to every species with a receiving station in assembly space. Sen looked at the archive page open on her desk. The first entry, 200 years ago, the first time Protocol 12 had been cited. The species in question had complied within 11 days and received a formal commendation from the Commission and a modest expansion of their permitted zone 8 years later, as a reward for cooperation. She thought about what that expansion had cost them, not the settlements surrendered, the ones they never imagined building afterward, because the ceiling had become real by then, internalized, taught to their children as the natural edge of where they were allowed to reach. She thought about Nola Brem in her chair in the community hall. She thought about Callum Dere and 22 years in the mining tunnels, and a door he had identified, correctly, as something other than a law being enforced. She thought about the 7 words and the initial below them, and whoever had read humanity's history files obsessively enough to decide that warning us was worth the risk. 1 hour passed. 2. 4. At the 4-hour mark, Cowell's channel opened without her requesting it. His image appeared on the main screen. Sen looked at his sensory filaments before she looked at anything else. They were retracted, not partially, almost fully, a configuration she had seen in exactly 1 piece of archive footage. A compact minister 14 years ago in a private communication that had been accidentally leaked during a relay error in the moment of deciding something that could not be undecided. Commander Aura, Cowell said, this matter will be referred to the Commission for full review. The fleet will maintain position pending Commission instruction. Earth will cooperate fully with any Commission review, Fleet Arbiter. The channel closed. By the end of that day, the sensor display that had shown 40 contacts showed 37, then 32, then 20, then 9. Each ship rotating its approach vector and jumping to faster than light without announcement or ceremony, departing the way institutions depart when they have recalculated, and found that the calculation no longer supports what they came to do. By nightfall, the display showed 0. Sen sat in the command chair for a long time after the last contact disappeared. Her hands rested on her knees. They were not entirely steady. The steadiness had been a professional requirement for 3 days, something she had produced on demand because a command module is not a place where you show the crew what your hands are doing when nothing is certain. The requirement had lifted. Her hands were telling her what the rest of her already knew, which was that she had been more afraid than she had permitted herself to acknowledge. Owen looked over from his station. Commander, Callaway Shelf is broadcasting. They want to know if normal operations should continue. The first unrehearsed expression she had produced in 3 weeks arrived without warning. Tell them, she said, that normal operations are exactly what they should continue. She left the archive sleeve on the desk in the command module when she finally departed the Adamantine 4 days later. Deliberately, she had considered taking it. It was her research, her methodology, 6 years of calibration work that had started as a personal project because no institutional budget had funded it and no senior analyst had considered it worth pursuing. She had a right to it, but she set it down and walked out of the command module and did not go back, because whoever commanded the Adamantine next would find it there. They would see the annotations. They would see what she had been looking for and what she had found. They would understand, without being told, what the document was for and why it had been carried aboard by hand. Some things do not need to travel with you. Some things need to stay where they can be found. 6 months later, Sen was sitting in a small cafe on the Adriatic coast when Veth-Ron arrived. He was shorter than she had expected and broader, with the gray-green skin coloring characteristic of Sothran from the inland highland regions of their home world. He wore a loose coat in a dark neutral color that she recognized from compact diplomatic briefings as the equivalent of coming to a meeting in ordinary clothes rather than a uniform. The coat meant, I came to talk, not to negotiate. He had arrived on Earth 3 weeks earlier, transported aboard a Uzeller diplomatic vessel after an asylum application that had moved through channels considerably faster than standard procedure usually permitted. Crisp had personally signed the approval. Veth-Ron wrapped both primary hands around his coffee cup and examined the contents with what Sen had learned, over 2 previous meetings, was genuine curiosity. He had encountered coffee for the first time 6 weeks ago and had since developed what he described as a professional interest in its neurological effects. Outside the cafe window, Lake Verrill lay pale silver in the morning light. Across the water, the launch facility's distant glow was visible, and if Sen looked slightly right and upward, she could trace the slow, bright arc of a colony transport climbing through the atmosphere. The launch schedule had not been interrupted for a single day during the entire crisis period. Crisp had insisted on it, partly practical, partly a statement. We keep going. That is what we do. The Commission has completed its review, Veth-Ron said. His translator module rendered his voice in precise, slightly formal English that Sen had stopped finding strange after their first meeting. Protocol 12 is being referred to the full assembly for structural amendment. The enforcement record you submitted was more comprehensive than anything the Commission had previously assembled in a single document. Several members were apparently unaware of the full pattern, Sen said. Veth-Ron tilted his head in the small lateral motion she had identified as his conceding gesture. Both are possible. Institutional awareness is not the same as individual awareness. Systems can operate consistently without every participant understanding the complete scope of what they are participating in. Sen watched a second colony transport begin its climb from the launch pad across the lake, slow at first, then faster as the atmosphere thinned, catching the morning light along its upper hull. The compact is not finished with this, she said. It was not a question. No, he said. They are reassessing. The internal political situation is more fragmented than it was 6 months ago. The faction that authorized the original enforcement action has lost standing, but the underlying strategic concern has not changed. You are still expanding. You are still moving toward the outer boundary and beyond it, toward regions the compact considers sensitive. Sensitive because of what's there, she said, or sensitive because of what we might become if we reach it. He looked at her steadily. Both. The second reason is the primary one. She had suspected that for a long time. The compact has observed the emergence of 4,217 space-capable civilizations in its recorded history, Vethron said. He set his coffee cup down with the deliberate precision she had come to recognize as his habit, the quality of treating small actions as deserving of attention. Approximately 3,000 documented to extinction or civilizational collapse before reaching what the compact's taxonomy classifies as stable galactic participation. Of the remaining, the overwhelming majority stabilized through one of two mechanisms: an internal ceiling, biological or cultural, that reduced their rate of expansion to a sustainable level, or regulatory guidance in their early development period. Guidance, Sen said. The language the compact uses is guidance. The effect in practice is what you described to the assembly. And humans, which category were we supposed to reach? Neither, he said. That is the difficulty. Your development trajectory does not match either pattern. Internal conflicts have not reduced your expansion rate. They have disrupted it, and then it has resumed, typically faster than before the disruption. Your technology adoption does not plateau. Every model the compact has applied to your civilization across 40 years of observation has underestimated you at the next measurement point. He paused, the small lateral tilt again, barely perceptible. You are not a civilization growing toward something the assembly has encountered before. You are growing toward something it has not. The cafe was quiet around them. A family at the next table, two children conducting the kind of argument that is really just a method of paying close attention to each other, the way children do when they are working out the edges of the world. What happens now, Sen said? With the Commission review the statute amendment, what does it actually change? The formal record. Protocol 12 will be amended to include consistency requirements that make targeted enforcement against a single species significantly harder to justify without documented evidence of comparable treatment across all members. Earth's 3 outer settlements will be formally recognized within an expanded zone, reflecting actual settlement boundaries. And the compact tries something else. Yes, he said simply. Sen looked at her coffee. Can I ask you something? Yes. You told us in 7 words that our history files were the most studied documents in the assembly. I've thought about that since the day I received that message. What do you find in them? What keeps people reading? He was quiet for a moment in the way he went quiet when deciding how much to say rather than what to say. She had learned the difference. When the compact studies the development histories of civilizations, he said, there is a category of information designated as foundational narrative. The story a civilization tells about itself, where it came from, what it survived, what it believes about its own nature. For most civilizations, that narrative is a story of ascent, beginning in difficulty, progressing towards stability, arriving at sustained continuity. The arc moves upward and then levels. It is, in the long view, a story about finding a place and remaining in it. Outside, the second transport was high enough now that it had lost the silver of the lake's reflection and caught instead the direct light of the sun, bright white against pale sky. Human history files do not tell that story, Vethron said. They tell a different one, a story in which the ascent does not level, in which every arrival at stability is followed by a disruption that produces a new beginning, in which the thing driving the civilization forward is not certainty about where it is going, but a specific quality for which we do not have a precise word in our language. He stopped, Sen waited. The closest translation, he said, is something like the refusal to accept that the ceiling is real. The cafe was ordinary around them, coffee cooling in cups, morning light moving across the table. 2 children at the next table finishing their argument and beginning a different one. We read your history files, Vethron continued, because they contain something we have no record of anywhere else. A civilization that has been told repeatedly, by circumstances and by entropy and by its own internal failures, that it has reached its limit, and has each time decided that the limit was someone else's assumption about it, and moved past it anyway. He lifted his coffee with both hands. The compact is afraid of you, he said, not because of what you have done. By every military and technological measure, you are less advanced than a dozen assembly species. They are afraid because of what you appear to believe about yourselves. Because a civilization that does not accept the ceiling as real is one that existing models cannot account for, and what cannot be modeled cannot be managed. Sen looked out the window. The second transport had climbed past the point where she could distinguish it from the morning sky. Somewhere above her, beyond what she could see from ground level, several hundred people were beginning a journey to somewhere that 40 years ago had not existed as a place where people lived. Vethron, she said. Yes. The informal dialogue group. The Uzeller, the Dremath, possibly the Pale Collective, tell them yes. We are interested in that conversation. He made the small lateral motion that meant agreement or concession, or perhaps the particular recognition that a thing had been decided, and the deciding was good. They sat for a while longer. Two people, one human and one Sothran, drinking coffee in an ordinary cafe by an ordinary lake, while above them and across the system, and out toward the edge of the zone Earth had refused to shrink back from, the settlements kept waking up and going to work. In the launch facility across the lake, the morning schedule was already running. A third transport rose from the pad, slow and bright, its hull catching the sun as it climbed, growing smaller as it moved higher, until it was a point of light among other points of light, indistinguishable from the ordinary stars.